Hello. It is another wet day across many parts of the UK. Will we see further bouts of wind and rain this week and beyond? Is there any sign of any drier weather or even any colder weather for the rest of January? I'm Aidan McGivern. I'm a Met Office meteorologist, and I'm going to be trying to answer those questions in this in-depth look at the weather across the UK this week and beyond. But before I get into the details of what we're expecting with the weather this week and beyond, I just thought it would be interesting to take a look back at what we've seen so far this winter, because we're approaching the halfway point of winter, and it's been a remarkable winter so far. A winter of contrasts, really, from the cold and dry to the mild and wet. Now, this graph here shows the temperature that we've seen so far this season. The daily average across the UK. The average line there is shown by the black in the middle, so where the actual temperature that we've seen across the UK differs from that average. We either get blue or we get these oranges, and what you can see clearly is that this winter so far started off fairly average first couple of days, then dropped to well below average, so well below this middle line. This is the actual temperature that we've seen averaged across the UK each day, and really that temperature reached a nadir around the middle of the month, 13th, 14th, 15th of December, way down. That's around 2.5 degrees below normal, before it then shot up around the 17th, 18th, 19th of December, just before Christmas. And since then we've had successive mild spells, temperature occasionally dropping back to the average line in the middle there, but really the theme has been mild. Not for everyone, has to be said. It has been fairly cold across northern parts of the UK, in particular Scotland and Northern Ireland, and this shows the temperature anomaly of the winter so far, so up to the 9th of January, and the blues show where the temperature has been below average so far compared with the whole winter, and really you've still got these blue colours across northern Scotland, so we've seen quite cold conditions continuing even after the main UK-wide cold spell ended around the middle of the month of December. But for the much of England and Wales, really, it's approaching average now. So the cold start to the season has been counterbalanced by the much milder weather that we've seen since that cold spell ended. So, yeah, it's not been mild everywhere. Northern Scotland has stayed cold a fair amount since the main cold spell ended, but England and Wales approaching average for the winter so far. Remarkable given how cold it was to start with. Rainfall has also been remarkable. With the cold air, of course, we had dry conditions predominantly. You can see that. These are the rainfall amounts each day of this season so far. You can see those by the bars. The average daily rainfall, what you'd expect in a typical winter, is the black line in the middle here. And so well below average rainfall each day for the first couple of weeks of December. And then the rainfall shot up at the same time as the temperature rising. And we've had some very wet days since then, particularly across England and Wales. That's where the mildest and wettest weather has been. And it's really, for some parts of Wales, it's rained every day of the year so far. And you can see that this is the January rainfall anomaly. So what we're seeing here is the rainfall amount so far this January compared with the month as a whole, and the browns are where you've got below average rainfall compared with the month as a whole. And of course, it says here you'd normally expect around 29% of the average at this point of the month. That would be these shades of brown at the bottom here, but you've got lighter browns across England, especially Western England, and more especially Wales, where there are some whites, which means that approaching the January average there across parts of Wales, particularly upland parts of Wales. And really that's been the story since the cold spell ended. We've had these bouts of rain coming in from the west and southwest, and they've dumped an awful lot of rainfall across higher parts of Western England and Wales in particular. And that's the reason why we're seeing such a high river response at the moment. The ground's saturated, River Severn really at very large levels at the moment. So, yeah, it's been wet and it's been mild second half of winter so far, but the first couple of weeks of winter started off really quite cold and dry, a winter of contrasts. And the question is, will we go back to that colder, drier weather, or will this current phase of winter continue? What you're seeing here is the satellite image over the last few days, and really that tells the story as well. We've got all this cloud in the Atlantic being picked up by the jet stream and being sent towards the UK. And in between these main weather systems, these main weather fronts, we're also seeing quite a number of showers come through. And so at the moment, we're seeing showery days, followed by wet days, followed by showery days, very little break in terms of the rainfall. And these systems are coming up from the west-southwest, so they're dumping an awful lot of rainfall over Wales in particular, and really you can see that over the last 24 hours. Monday was a showery day, some big beefy cumulonimbus clouds I noticed out in the outside, but then the showers faded away, then the next weather front came in, and you can see once that approaches southwest of England, Wales, how much rain it's dumping, really, especially these brighter colours showing up over parts of Wales and parts of northwest England as well. It moved into Scotland, and it did fall as some snow. So we had some snow in these showers or longer spells of precipitation across northern parts of the UK on Monday. Then the showers faded away, and then when this next weather system came in, well, it has brought some snow on its leading edge across Scotland, but it's also bringing in milder air. So the snow level coming up, and the snow really by the end of today confined to the higher peaks. You can see that. This is the blue showing the rainfall, the white showing snowfall, and by the end of the day, it's the higher peaks of Scotland seeing the snowfall. Most of the rest of the UK turning much milder. So really there's very little sign of this weather pattern stopping any time in the next few days. We're going to see further bouts of wind and rain. Actually, if you take a look at the bigger picture here, you can see why. The jet stream, powerful and pointed in our direction. Relatively in a flat pattern. Yeah, there are some ripples in it, but it's not that amplified at the moment. And what it's doing is it's picking up these areas of low pressure, it's deepening, and it's sending them towards the UK. So here's today's weather system. That's clearing overnight, and reasonably tight isobars there. You can see across northern Scotland. I'll talk about the winds across northern Scotland in just a moment, but tight isobars as that low pressure exit the scene. And then another low coming along, a couple of occluded fronts there being picked up by the jet stream to bring further spells of showers or rain into Wednesday. And then the next system comes along, another deepening area of low pressure, firing its weather fronts in towards the UK from the west. And yet again, these ones, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see they are pointed towards Wales and the southwest once again. This one in particular on the leading edge, that's going to bring rain mostly to England and Wales. The next one takes a more northerly path, so it's going to bring rain more widely later Wednesday or into Thursday. And that then clears. Jet stream still in charge. It's firing across the Atlantic there. And these isobars are tightening, so strong winds as well. And a showery day expected on Friday then as those weather systems move through, showers coming through, strong winds as well. And then the next area of low pressure gets picked up. So really we're seeing this rinse and repeat pattern with areas of low pressure in the Atlantic being picked up by the jet stream, pushing their weather fronts in, bringing a lot of rainfall to western parts of the UK in particular, and especially Wales and western England, the higher parts of these areas. Then they clear to blustery showers. And what we're also seeing as these weather systems move through is temperatures oscillating. So as the weather systems move in, this warm front, cold front combination into the weekend, they bring milder air. But as they clear then, we've got colder air following in. And in particular, later in the weekend, what we're expecting is for the winds to come round from the northwest. And you can see these blues coming in for later Saturday and into Sunday. Again, tightly packed isobars, so another blustery weekend coming up. But once the main spell of rain is out of the way, and we've got this cold air coming in from the northwest, where it's certainly going to feel much chillier, temperatures dipping below average by Sunday and into the start of next week. So temperatures up and down. It is a mild day today across southern parts of the UK. It's colder further north. Then as weather systems move through, the temperatures drop, showers and blustery breezes. And then into the weekend, a more strongly pronounced cold dig coming in from the northwest. So let's take a look at the weather day to day in detail. This is the rest of Tuesday, and you can see the rain is pushing its way northeastwards, some snow over the Scottish mountains, but really that's becoming confined to the higher peaks for the rest of the day. Once that moves through, we've got a cold front coming in from the west, and that's going to bring another bout of wet weather overnight across western and then eventually central parts of the UK. It's going to move through a bit quicker than the warm front, so not as much rain, but still 20-30 millimetres or so over higher parts of the west. Then that's followed by showers and a particularly strong wind across northern parts of the country. And so there are warnings in force at the moment for rain and for wind over the next few days. The next system then turns up for later Wednesday. That's going to bring another spell of very wet weather across western parts of England into Wales and then clearing its way. But it doesn't particularly affect Scotland and Northern Ireland. Stays showery here through Wednesday before on Thursday morning this next frontal system moves in. Another wet day to come for many western areas, and then that affects Scotland and Northern Ireland as well as it moves through. So wet and windy weather, bouts of rain coming in from the west repeatedly over the next few days, and the ground is already saturated. That's why we've got a number of weather warnings at the moment. Let's take a look at those. So this is the rest of today. We've got rain warnings across western parts of the UK, so western Scotland, northwest England and Wales. 60 to 100 millimetres in places, and that falling on top of saturated ground. I showed you how wet that ground is, how much rain we've seen in the west so far this season. And then moving through, and we've got, I'll just rewind the clock there, a wind warning. And I'll show you the winds in just a second, but a wind warning for tonight and into the start of Wednesday for northern Scotland, and then the next rain warning for parts of Wales and the southwest. Again, a lot of rainfall, particularly over higher parts of Wales and the southwest, falling onto saturated ground, could cause flooding impacts, a lot of surface water about, rising rivers and so on. Then there's the potential for further warnings later in the week when we get a bit more detail, when we get a bit more confidence about what's happening with the wind and the rain for the second half of the week and going into the weekend. But yeah, lots to think about over the next 24 hours or so. Just take a look at the winds for starters. It is a windy day out there. It's you can see the wind gust graphic here. The key is on the right there. And if I play that forward, what we're going to see is the low pressure, actually I'll put on the low, that's actually going to intensify as it crosses northwest Scotland overnight, and what we'll see is the wind gusts ramp up there across, by the end of the evening, Lewis and Harris, and I think you'll start to see 60 mile per hour wind gusts appear here, perhaps in one or two exposed spots, 70 mile per hour wind gusts. Then those strongest winds transfer into the north of the mainland of Scotland as well as Orkney by early tomorrow morning. And again, 70, perhaps 75 mile per hour wind gusts affecting the Northern Isles for a time during the morning on Wednesday. So enough to cause impacts for the Northern Isles as well as the Outer Hebrides, of course. Then that low fills, it pushes into the Norwegian Sea, but we've got further blustery weather following on for Wednesday, this next low coming along. And again, it's gusty. It's going to be gusty across the hills of Wales, southwest England, perhaps the Pennines as well. And then, I'll just pause it there, and you can see the next system coming in. So this is Wednesday night into the start of Thursday. This is the next bout of rain for Wales and the southwest, but also accompanied by these strong winds, 60, perhaps 70 mile per hour wind gusts coming in from the southwest. So yeah, that's going to be a very blustery period, very strong winds coming in there, could cause some impacts. And then once that clears out of the way, the next low comes along. So this is tied in with this area of low pressure. It's what we call a warm frontal feature just ahead of the next frontal system. But this low, you can see, step back and just zoom out a smidge. These very strong wind gusts associated with this low. This is a bigger beast. It's intensifying further, and it's likely to bring this swathe of strong winds into western Scotland. So gales by later Thursday into Friday, and the Irish Sea then as well overnight. So again, 60 and perhaps in some exposed spots, 70 mile per hour wind gusts. And then as the rain goes through, it's going to stay very blustery into Friday. It's a showery day, but the wind is going to be particularly lively through this central swathe of the UK. You can see 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The wind likely to hit the hills and bounce off them. So strong wind gusts around the hills and just on the other side of the hills as well. Then a ridge of high pressure Friday evening into the start of the weekend, but the next low comes along, the next weather system. Of course, this is a few days away, so there are currently some differences in the computer models in terms of how they handle this area of low pressure and how deep it is in its track and so on. And that will make a difference in terms of the wind strength across these central areas as we head into the weekend. But it does look like another windy period across this central swathe. So bouts of rain, bouts of wind continuing during the rest of the week, really. Now that's obviously going to have an impact on temperatures, both in terms of where the wind is coming from, whether it's a warm direction or a cold direction, and also the wind stirring the air up to prevent things like overnight frosts and so on. And because it stays so breezy, I don't think most of us are going to see an overnight frost. But let's take a look at the maximum and minimum temperature trends over the next week or so. And just pick somewhere in the south, so somewhere like Southampton. And this is showing the maximum temperature over the next week and the minimum temperature on the bottom there. And what you can see is this downward trend, both in terms of maximum and minimum temperature. The temperature will go up and down on a regular basis. You can see that 13 on Tuesday, so today's the mildest day in the south. Back to 10 tomorrow, then mild again as the next spell of rain moves through on Thursday. Then it does trend downwards. So although it's up and down at the moment, because it depends on whether it's southwesterlies pushing rain through or northwesterlies pushing showers through, there is a trend towards more northwesterly airflows by the weekend and colder air. And you can see that with the overnight temperatures as well. We're dropping down towards frost territory by the end of the weekend and the start of the next week, even if it does stay fairly blustery. So this downward trend for Southampton, just picking somewhere around the middle part of the UK, a similar kind of trend, not quite as mild in Hull, but further north, of course, it's mild today for Glasgow, and then it drops into the single figures or even the mid-single figures by the start of next week. And somewhere even further north, Stornoway, it's not what you call mild really at the moment, so northern Scotland's still on the cold side. In fact, we can just zoom in a bit further here and have a look at somewhere a bit more inland. Let's choose Aviemore. And yeah, that downward trend, we're into the negative figures by the weekend. So in some places, and you can see 2s, 3s, 4s Celsius by day, Aviemore by the weekend. In some places by the weekend, that northwesterly airflow that I mentioned will be cold enough to bring snow in the showers. So I think what we'll see after a couple of mild days is the snow level lowering, and successive showers coming through by the weekend are likely to bring snow. Not to the likes of Southampton or Cardiff or Birmingham, but to Scotland's hills, to the Pennines, to some exposed parts of northern and northwestern Scotland. I think at lower levels we'll see that colder air bring some wintry precipitation by the weekend because of that downward trend in temperature. But this isn't beast from the east. It's not going to be sharp northerly like we saw at the start of winter. It's not going to be as cold as that. It's just a northwesterly airflow that by the end of the weekend will bring lower than average temperatures, particularly across northern parts of the UK. If indeed you are looking for something colder and more especially something drier, because it's been so wet during recent weeks, well, let's take a look at some of the longer range outputs. I'll put them up here, and this one in particular. And what is important about this chart really, there's a lot of information to take in here, but basically it shows the likelihood each day going out until almost the end of February, the likelihood of different weather patterns. And it's got 8 typical weather patterns represented by different colours here. Now these are weather patterns that the UK typically sees, And the reds and oranges are where you've got higher pressure in the vicinity of the UK, and the blues are where you've got lower pressure in the vicinity of the UK. So, for example, at the moment is dominated by these dark blues. That's the most likely weather pattern over the next few days. And when you look at this, it says typically North Atlantic oscillation positive weather patterns. And so what that means is you've got very low pressure over Iceland, higher pressure over the Azores, and this strong westerly. And that is indeed what we're seeing at the moment. Now, this is quite clear. It shows by the end of the third week, going to the fourth week of January, a greater prevalence of these reds and oranges, but only for a few days, perhaps a week or so. And what that suggests is that we're more likely by that stage to see higher pressure closer to the UK before these blues start to swing back again. And so there are a couple of root causes for this. It's not just looking at the computer models. There are things that are happening elsewhere around the world that could potentially explain why there are these oranges and reds coming through, a greater chance of higher pressure for weeks 3 and 4 of January. So we're looking at later next week and into the following week. One of them is the something we call the Madden-Julian oscillation. So this is essentially an oscillation of rainfall that we see across the tropics. And these rainfall patterns in the tropics can be really energetic, these big clusters of thunderstorms. So of course, when these big clusters of thunderstorms push out their energy, that can reverberate across the globe. And in particular, when we see a pattern of enhanced thundery activity across the West Pacific, which is what we're seeing at the moment, that can influence the jet stream in the North Pacific. It can push it out of shape, and that more disrupted jet stream then has downstream impacts. It's about a week or two later can result in a more amplified jet stream for the UK. And so if we just take a look again back at our very own jet stream across the UK, in fact, if I turn the globe around, I've not looked at this in advance, but it'll be interesting to see if we are seeing a more amplified jet stream emerge across the North Pacific. And it does look like, so this is Wednesday, it does look like we're starting to see this impact with the more amplification across the Pacific. You can see that one's pushing north a bit more, that one's pushing south. So what that means, and that's the result of thunderstorms across the rest of the Pacific. What that means is that eventually we see that greater amplification across the UK. So rather than the jet stream coming in nice and powerful in a straight line, sending these areas of low pressure in, when we get more amplification, you get a greater chance of higher pressure developing closer to the UK because it forms to the south of one of these ridges of the jet stream. So that is potentially the root cause of that increased likelihood of higher pressure for the second half of January. And in fact, we can have a look at that. This shows the most, not that one, is it that one? This shows the most likely weather pattern out of all the different computer models for the start of next week. And what we've got is low pressure moving away, this northwesterly airflow, that's why it's colder than average. And really that's what we're seeing for the computer model output for the start of next week. Then, taking a look a little further ahead, will that move away? No, click that one. What you can see is that amplification increasing. So this ridge of high pressure developing to the west of the UK, this dig of northerly airflow for the second half of next week. This is the most likely weather pattern. Again, it's not guaranteed. It starts to get a bit messy. Different computer models are saying different things by this stage, but this is the most likely thing, and it shows greater amplification, this ridge of high pressure to the west of the UK, this trough of low pressure to the east, and northerly winds, which would result in colder than average weather, although no signs of anything extremely cold at the moment. And then for later in January, the computer models are coming up with something like this as a more likely weather pattern. Higher pressure building to the south, and weather systems becoming a bit more confined to northern parts of the UK. And so something a bit drier coming into the south. But by this stage, there are lots of different outcomes in the computer models. They do get a little bit wishy-washy, so nothing's guaranteed. I'm just talking about what's most likely. You can see that there's a stronger signal for higher pressure from this, but it's not the strongest signal I've ever seen. It's still giving a 40% chance of lower pressure closer to the UK. It's just getting hold of something there which may be related to that Madden-Julian oscillation, that pattern of rainfall, tropical thunderstorms in the Pacific. So that's what the longer-term signal is looking like. It looks like for the next week and a bit, we're going to continue to see these bouts of wind and rain coming in from the west and the southwest. Once again, it's western parts of England and Wales where we're going to see the brunt of that rain, with the rain heaviest over western hills. And we're going to see strong winds at times, northern parts of Scotland tonight, other parts of the UK through the next few days. Into the weekend, into the start of next week, something a bit colder, but still quite a number of showers, still a strong wind through the weekend and the start of next week, before the potential, just that hint of something more settled coming along for the second half of January, but not completely settled by any means, just less wet and windy than the current weather pattern is allowing for. That's all I've got time for today, but thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look at the weather this week and beyond. Let me know in the comments if you like this sort of thing. And of course, we'll have shorter forecasts as always, as well as a mix of longer forecasts on our social media channels, which you can stay up to date with. And if you're not subscribing on YouTube, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can catch more of these forecasts when they occur in the future. Bye-bye.